Welcome to News Beacon, your trusted source for breaking headlines, global insights, and sharp analysis from around the world. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. August 10th, 2025. A date that would soon be etched into the history of global agriculture and trade. The port of Veracruz buzzed with its usual humidity, the air thick with the scent of salt and diesel. But beneath the surface, a sense of unease rippled through the docks. Something was off. Something big. The American Pride, a massive cargo ship loaded with U.S. corn, was met not with the routine inspection crews had come to expect, but with a swift, unprecedented rejection. The ship's arrival, once a symbol of cross-border cooperation, now marked the beginning of a standoff. Mexican officials, acting under strict new government mandates, refused the entire shipment. No tests, no negotiations, no exceptions. The message was delivered with unwavering resolve. The stunned crew could only watch in disbelief as cranes dumped the golden corn onto the concrete docks, not into waiting silos. Years of routine shattered in a single, jarring moment. Tension thickened in the humid air. This was no ordinary trade spat. This was a confrontation with global consequences. Mexico had drawn a bold line in the sand. U.S. genetically modified corn was no longer welcome. The ban was total, and the world was about to witness its first dramatic enforcement. As night fell, floodlights bathed the port in harsh white light, illuminating a shocking scene. Mountains of corn, once destined for Mexican tables, now piled high and surrounded by emergency crews. Suddenly, flames erupted. Smoke billowed into the night sky as the corn was set ablaze. The fire was no accident. It was a spectacle, a message broadcast to the world. The burning wasn't just about disposal. It was a declaration of sovereignty, a public rejection of foreign influence over Mexico's food supply. Mexican officials, clipboards in hand, documented every moment. This was more than policy enforcement. It was a ritual cleansing, an eradication of GM corn from Mexican soil. The message was clear and absolute. Mexico's new policy would not bend, not even for its largest trading partner. For U.S. farmers and traders, the burning pyres signaled chaos. Decades of reliable trade, worth billions, were suddenly in jeopardy. Panic spread as corn prices plummeted and futures contracts unraveled. The North American corn market, built on decades of agreements and trust, was suddenly in crisis. Silos stood empty, equipment idle, and gates closed to what was once a seamless flow of grain. The smoke over Veracruz marked the end of an era, and the start of a desperate scramble for new buyers, new routes, and new alliances. For Canada, the spectacle was a signal. Opportunity was knocking. Canadian officials moved quickly, sensing a chance to fill the void left by the U.S. The world's media descended on Veracruz, cameras rolling as the corn burned. The foundation of the global corn trade had cracked, and every nation was watching, calculating their next move. The market was up for grabs. In the aftermath of the fiery rejection, a new chapter in the world's food supply was about to be written. Mexico's rejection of U.S. corn wasn't a sudden decision. It was years in the making, shaped by growing concerns over agriculture, health, and national identity. A presidential decree, now fully enforced, banned both genetically modified corn and the use of glyphosate, a controversial herbicide linked to environmental and health risks. The government argued the move was about food sovereignty, protecting the country's ability to control its own food supply, and preserving Mexico's rich diversity of native corn varieties, which are central to its culture and cuisine. U.S. officials, however, called the ban unscientific and claimed it violated existing trade agreements, warning of economic consequences for both nations. Tensions escalated further when Mexico expanded the ban to include corn used for animal feed, effectively closing the door on nearly all U.S. corn imports and disrupting established supply chains. American exporters saw this as a political move rather than a genuine safety concern, arguing that decades of trade were being upended for ideological reasons. Despite the ban, the U.S. kept shipping corn, hoping for a reversal or compromise, but Mexico stood firm, determined to enforce its new policy. The burning of corn at Veracruz became a powerful public statement. The debate was over, and Mexico was sending a clear message to the world. Mexico enforced its law strictly, regardless of mounting international pressure and criticism from trading partners. As a result, the world had to adapt to a new reality, with global corn markets shifting and trade routes being redrawn almost overnight. At the heart of the crisis, a clash of values. In the US, GM crops are standard, boosting yields and efficiency. In Mexico, corn is heritage, culture, and biodiversity. Fears of cross-pollination and loss of native varieties fueled a powerful anti-GMO movement. The ban was about protecting tradition and sovereignty, not just food safety. US officials cited science, Mexico cited culture and precaution. Trade agreements couldn't bridge this divide. The fiery shutdown was the inevitable result of irreconcilable worldviews. Burning the corn was a calculated act, far from standard procedure. Mexico wanted to send an unmistakable message. GM corn was not just unwelcome, it was a contaminant. The flames symbolized national resolve, reassuring citizens and warning foreign interests. Internationally, it was a direct challenge to the US. No compromise, no negotiation. Destroying the corn ensured none would enter the market, legally or illegally. The act escalated the dispute from trade to principle. It was costly, but for Mexico, it was the only way to guarantee the integrity of its new law. The world took notice. The news from Veracruz devastated the American heartland. Overnight, a sense of dread swept through rural communities as families gathered around kitchen tables, watching the headlines unfold. The shock was immediate and profound. U.S. farmers, long reliant on Mexico as their primary export market, suddenly lost their biggest customer. For decades, this partnership had been the backbone of their livelihoods, shaping planting decisions and financial plans. Contracts became worthless overnight. Harvested corn had nowhere to go. Storage bins and silos filled to capacity, leaving farmers with mountains of unsold grain and no buyers in sight. Corn prices crashed, flooding the domestic market and hurting all producers. The sudden oversupply drove prices to historic lows, making it impossible for many to break even. The ripple spread, grain elevators, truckers, railways, and port workers all suffered. The entire supply chain ground to a halt, leaving thousands without work or income. Rural towns felt the pain. Jobs lost, businesses shuttered, uncertainty everywhere. The local economy, already fragile, began to unravel as spending dried up and hope faded. Many farmers faced bankruptcy, unable to repay loans taken on the promise of Mexican sales. Equipment was repossessed, and families struggled to keep up with mounting bills. Generational farms teetered on the brink. Decades, sometimes centuries, of hard work and tradition were suddenly at risk of being lost forever. The crisis was personal. Families faced losing everything. The stress and heartbreak touched every member, from the youngest children to the oldest grandparents. The trade system that encouraged dependence on one market had failed them. Years of policy and planning had left farmers vulnerable, with few alternatives when disaster struck. The certainty of the past was gone, replaced by fear for the future. Each day brought new anxieties, as families wondered how they would survive the months ahead. The collapse was not just economic, but emotional. Communities leaned on each other, sharing grief and uncertainty as they faced an unknown tomorrow. The American Midwest was in turmoil. Once thriving towns and fields now stood silent, marked by loss and worry. The fallout was just beginning. For many, the hardest days were still to come, as the true cost of the crisis continued to unfold. As U.S. farmers reeled, Canada seized the moment. Canadian growers, already producing non-GM corn for niche markets, were ready. With identity-preserved supply chains in place, they quickly negotiated with Mexican buyers. Shipments shifted from U.S. ports to Canadian ones. Trains rolled south from Ontario and Quebec. Mexican importers found a seamless replacement: Canadian non-GM corn. Demand for Canadian corn soared, and farmers expanded acreage. Canada became Mexico's new primary supplier almost overnight. The North American trade map was redrawn. For Canada, it was a windfall and a new responsibility. The corn market had a new leader. The corn crisis sent shockwaves through North America. The U.S. launched a trade dispute, straining relations and threatening broader cooperation. Surplus U.S. corn flooded global markets, driving down prices and hurting farmers worldwide. Supply chains rewired. U.S. export routes withered, Canadian ones boomed. Investment shifted north, while U.S. infrastructure faced decline. Other industries took note. Dependencies were now seen as risks. Companies began diversifying supply chains, seeking resilience over efficiency. The crisis exposed the fragility of even the strongest trade agreements. Nearshoring and friendshoring became the new buzzwords. The economic geography of the continent was transformed. Beyond trade headlines, the human cost was immense. In the Midwest, job losses rippled through farms, suppliers, and small towns. Local businesses closed, tax revenues fell, and public services suffered. Young people left for cities, accelerating rural decline. Communities already fragile were hollowed out further. In Canada, prosperity brought its own challenges. Booming demand strained infrastructure and drove up costs. Farmers scrambled to expand, facing new pressures. The shift highlighted the vulnerability of workers tied to global trade. For some, opportunity. For others, hardship. The human story was one of contrasting fortunes. Trade policy had real, personal consequences. The landscape of rural North America was forever changed. The corn crisis of 2025 reshaped North American agriculture. U.S. farmers must adapt, diversifying crops, seeking new markets, or shifting to non-GM production. Canada faces the challenge of scaling up while maintaining quality. The era of seamless continental trade is over. Caution and sovereignty now guide policy. The USMCA will be tested, perhaps rewritten. North America is now a patchwork of competing blocs, not a unified market. The crisis revealed the deep interplay of politics, culture, and economics. Trade is more than goods. It's about values and priorities. The future is more fragmented, more flexible, and less certain. The golden fields of corn still grow, but their journey has changed forever.